Welcome back. As the atrocities against civilians continue to mount in Ukraine, there are questions about why the United Nations isn't perhaps doing more to stand up to Russia. Ukraine's president did not hold back his anger this week, addressing the UN Security Council, pleading with it to act or face irrelevance.
Чи вважаєте ви, що час міжнародного права минув? Якщо ваша відповідь ні, то діяти потрібно зараз. Діяти негайно. Потрібно негайно повертати силу.
Yesterday, the UN General Assembly did what many already saw as an obvious move, voting to suspend Russia from the Human Rights Council. But Russia still holds a powerful vote on the Security Council, something it's already used to veto a resolution denouncing the invasion. So let's go behind the headlines to look at the challenges facing the United Nations and other international bodies. Joining me now, Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Rae, and former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizations, Victoria Holt. So, Ambassador Rae, if I may start with you, that speech was certainly heard around the world. Zelensky kept pushing at this argument that what is the point of a Security Council that can agree to offer security, where a country like Russia has veto power over sanctioning Russia. Is he right that the Security Council at the UN cannot work effectively on this?
Yes, he is. But I think we also have to focus on the member states of the UN. The fact is that there is still the ability of member states to take steps against Russia in support of Ukraine, and nothing's stopping us from doing that. The only thing that stops us from doing that are the strategic issues around, well, what happens if we do more with respect to directly engaging Russia from a military standpoint? And I think it's all very well to say it's the fault of some institution, but it's the people that make up the institution that have to take responsibility for their decisions.
So if that's the case, Ms. Holt, if right now, I mean, Russia obviously a permanent member of the Security Council, but what a lot of people sitting at home want to know is, how permanent is permanent? Is there any world in which that membership status changes?
Well, in the short run, Russia has certainly isolated itself. It does not have any good rationale for what it's done by invading Ukraine. And that's why you see the General Assembly condemning it earlier and then booting them off the Human Rights Council. But as far as getting Russia off the Security Council in the short run, they would have to vote for that. But Russia may just have spurred Security Council reform in a way that we haven't seen in decades. And I think that long run, that may be something we look at.
Ambassador Rae, can you play that out a little bit? Is it possible that the membership status shifts now?
I don't think that's going to be easy, but I do think that Victoria, if I may, is absolutely right when she says that there is a renewed momentum at the UN for reform because of the way Russia has abused the veto. And we'll see whether the other permanent members can get their act together and figure out a way to reform the Security Council in a way that will make it more effective. But I hate to beat the same drum all the time, but my consistent message to everyone is don't blame the arena for the conduct of the players. It's the focus has to be on what are the players prepared to do? What are the nation states prepared to do to stop Russian aggression? The UN doesn't have an army. The UN doesn't have a capacity on its own to do these things. The pressure on Russia has to come from the member states. A lot is being done. The question for all of us is, what more can we do to stop Russian aggression? That's a perfectly legitimate question that was being asked.
Well, in terms of what the institution has done or can't do, I mean, Ms. Holt, as you were saying, yesterday, Russia was removed from the Human Rights Council. And I'm curious, what's your sense of what that accomplishes? It's easy for people to say that in practice, well, that doesn't accomplish anything. It's symbolic. But what's the measure of the weight to that symbolism?
Well, in some senses, the weight is the political will of the international community. So you can look at the UN as sort of the body that expresses things, and that those votes in the General Assembly give credibility and legitimacy to the coalition that's been built and imposed sanctions, that has reduced the economic power of Russia, that has tried to go after the oligarchs and tried to shift the balance of power within Putin's inner circle. It's also a vote that shows where there may be avenues for political discussions. Some of those countries that abstained, I hope, are doing some of the diplomacy that the ambassador and others may also be involved in, because the biggest and quickest way is to get Russia to stop is violence in Ukraine, and to stop the violence will require a political and diplomatic solution. But those votes in the General Assembly open the door for that.
So a political solution is obviously a diplomatic solution is the best for everyone at this point. There continues to be, so much talk about NATO, the reasons why it won't intervene militarily. But Ambassador Rae, when I think of the UN, I think of the tradition of blue helmets, and I'm curious what the calculation is for putting peacekeepers in Ukraine, or maybe creating this rapid reaction force, which the UN has been talking about forever, I think.
Well, I think the question really depends on the will of countries that would make up the rapid force. Adrienne, whenever we talk about all these institutional ways in which we can respond, it's very important to remember that peacekeeping in 1956 happened because Canada and other countries said, we'll do the peacekeeping. And by the way, in Suez, there was a ceasefire and there was a peace to keep. There is no ceasefire in Ukraine, as you know, and there is no peace at the moment. So can we build humanitarian corridors in which there would have to be a policing of a humanitarian ceasefire? Yes, we can. The question is there the will to do that? Is Russia prepared to do it? Not yet. We had to put a huge amount of pressure on a number of countries over the years in disputes to get them to stop fighting. And Victoria Holt is very right when she says the end of the fighting is really up to Mr. Putin, and it's up to us to continue put the pressure on Mr. Putin that'll forces him to see the costs of what he's doing. What he's doing is incredibly self-destructive for his own country. He's destroying the economic, moral, social, and political foundations of his own regime, of his own government, of his own country. He's got to think about that for a while, because that's a really serious problem for him and for the world, frankly.
I appreciate the effort to think of, a reasoned argument having an impact. I also wonder if there is a red line with Russia. And I know diplomats hate that term, but do you think either an international body or individual countries do see a red line with Russia?
I do think that's the right question. And Ukraine has asked the world to help it. It has said, I want to take care of my own people. The Ukrainians want to be protected, and the world has permission to come in and help them do that. So that does not have to go through the United Nations. And I think between the sanctions, the defensive and humanitarian measures, the calls for accountability, and the behind-the-scenes diplomacy, the world is trying to respond. I think Russia's already crossed a red line by its very actions. But I think we'll have to wait for a peacekeeping mission until there's a bit more of a peace to keep. That's not our call for inaction, but more action along all the fronts that the ambassador has described.
All right, Victoria Holt, Bob Rae, thank you both.
Thank you very much, Adrienne. Good to be with you.
You too.
Yes, thank you.